back to another video of pulsating biology for the chapter movement into and out of the cell. We have covered most of the topic in the previous video, and now we'll covering the other topics and give it a recall of the entire chapter for this video of the crash course. In this crash course video, we need to learn about the three major processes, which include the diffusion, the osmosis, and the active transport. Let's learn each of them in detail. Let's begin with the crash course topic for the diffusion and the osmosis after discussing the syllabus. The first thing that we were asked in the 3.1 was to discuss about the water and its importance in the solution or being a solvent. So let's recall the topic. First of all, water is a polar molecule. Now, what is meant by the term polar molecule? We've already discussed that the polar molecule are basically the molecule that consists of positive as well as the negative charges. These two charges, when constituted in a molecule, it means it is a polar molecule. And the most common example of polar molecule is the water itself. Water itself is a polar molecule since it contains the H42 positive, 2 ions, and the O2 minus ion. This is why it is determined that it is a polar molecule. The next important thing about water it is that it is a universal solvent. Now, what is meant by the universal solvent? Universal solvent means that it dissolves everything. It dissolves most of the solute. Most of the solute in itself. This is why it is known as a universal solvent. The structure of water when it comes to chemical bonding, it is a bend structure. Now, what is meant by a bend structure? The bend structure is the one structure that consists of the angle of 104.5 degree. The water molecule formula is H2O. The two molecules of the hydrogen and one molecule of the oxygen binds together in such a manner that it forms a bend-shaped structure with an angle of 104.5. You can see in this diagram, there are two hydrogen molecules and one oxygen molecules that are binded in such a manner. The hydrogen at the both two ends are positively charged, this one and this one, while oxygen is negatively charged, giving it a bent structure of angle 104.5 degrees. This is actually what it means by water being a polar molecule, and it is a universal solvent. That means that it dissolves most of the solute in itself and giving itself a bent structure. And this is what you need to learn about water and it being a universal solvent and it being a polar molecule. Next, what does exactly the water being a universal solvent means? Let's learn about it. Water is a universal solvent. Why? The question is why and how. It is so because it has the ability to dissolve almost all kind of solute. All kinds of solute. And by all kinds of solute means acidic, basic, neutral, all the kinds of solute that exist in the universe, they can be dissolved in the water. It has a bend structure of 104.5 by the two hydrogen molecules and the one oxygen molecule. It has the partial charges. The hydrogen, the charges are divided onto the molecules with respect to the position they have in their periodic table and the amount of electrons that they have in the outermost shell. So hydrogen have the +2 electron and thus it is positively charged with the two electrons, and oxygen is negatively charged. So this means that these partial charges basically make the water molecule polar. Thus, due to this, the water is said to be universal solvent. So these are the three major pointers that says that its ability to dissolve most of its solutes. It has a bend structure of the angle 104.5 and its partial charges, that is the positive and the negative charges that exist in the water molecule, that makes it a universal solvent. Next, we need to learn about the third pointer, which we were asked about the water as a solvent. So how water is considered as a solvent? It dissolves most of the organic and inorganic substances. The organic substances and the inorganic substances. Water has the ability to dissolve all kinds of solute in itself. Number 2 pointer says needed for all the biochemical reaction. By the term biochemical reaction, it means that metabolic and the catabolic reactions that are taking place in a body or in any system simultaneously is known as the biochemical reaction. So, all of these catabolic and metabolic reactions are incomplete without the water. Since water is a major solvent, thus they are incomplete without the water. They require water in order to proceed. That's why water is needed for all the biochemical reactions. Now, the third pointers ask us remove excretory products such as urea and the excessive salt. The excretory products that are present in the body or any plant or living organisms that are secreted in the form of a urea or the excessive salt that have the water in themselves. Sometimes the water retained there and sometimes it is passed out within the excretory products. Thus, for the excretion, the water plays a very important role. The fourth pointer says in plants, root hair absorb mineral salt present in the soil in the solution. Like this is the structure of a root hair cell. They have these structures that can absorb the minerals from the root. And supply the food and the water molecules up to the plant. So the plant root hair absorb the mineral salt present in the soil in a solution form. By solution form means it is absorbed in the water molecule form. So the water is absorbed and then it is passed on to the for the other processes that take place in a plant. So it is water also plays a very important role for the absorption processes of absorption processes of plants. These are the main pointers to understand how water acts as a solvent. After discussing the water being an important solvent, we need to discuss about the three main processes, that is the diffusion, osmosis, and the active transport. So let's begin with the diffusion first. What is the exact definition of diffusion? Is that it is the net movement of molecules from the region of net movement of molecules from region of high concentration to low concentration. Do remember that in the osmosis we learn about the water molecules, but in diffusion we talk about the regular molecules. So the definition says the net movement of molecules from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration, that means where there are more number of molecules to the region there are less number of molecules. But the key point here is the concentration gradient. It is along the concentration gradient, the movement of the water molecule, that is down the concentration gradient. Concentration gradient basically tells us about the difference between the regions of the higher concentration and the lower concentration. In such a manner, the gradient is basically maintained, so the movement of molecules is easier and it is in a grade format. So this is what you need to know about the diffusion. Let's discuss about the osmosis. The osmosis is similar to the diffusion, but it is the movement of water molecules. The two pointers that you need to learn about the osmosis, it is that it is about the water molecules, and the next thing that you need to learn about is that it passes through a partially permeable membrane. These two pointers basically differentiate the osmosis from the process of the diffusion. It's similar to the point when it comes to the movement of molecules from the higher concentration to the movement of molecules to the lower concentration, as similar as the diffusion, but through a partially permeable membrane. About the partially permeable membrane, please do note that you don't use the word semi-permeable. In your syllabus for the O levels, we have been asked to use the term partially permeable. Although the both of the meanings are same, partially means that they do not allow all the substances. It does not allow all the substances to pass. Does not allow all substances to pass. It only allows few of the substances to pass through the partially permeable membrane from the different regions, from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration. Let's discuss about the phenomena of the osmosis with the help of a diagram. This is the diagram that tells us that in this region we have a higher concentration and we have more number of molecules, and here we have less number of molecules. And this tells us that this is the region of high concentration and this is the region of low concentration. So this is the region of high concentration and this is the region of lower concentration. Let's count them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So let's say there are 8 number of molecules here and there are around 5 number of molecules here. That it is said that helps us pretty simple differentiation of the high concentration and the lower concentration. Now, the thing about the partially permeable membrane is that it only allows few substances to pass from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration. These are considered to be the solute, and here we have the solvent. From the solvent, the solute molecules move to a partially permeable membrane. So this is the example that will help you understand the process of osmosis in further detail. That we need to learn that it is about the water molecules, and the secondly, it passes through a partially permeable membrane. Partially permeable membrane. Now, the next video to cover regard to the diffusion is the factors of diffusion. There are four major factors of the diffusion. Number one, we have the surface area, then we have the temperature, then we have the concentration gradient, and then we have distance with regard to the diffusion. So let's talk about the surface area first. The relation of the surface area to the diffusion is directly proportional. What does the directly proportional mean? Means that whenever there is a greater surface area, there will be the greater rate of the diffusion. A very common example that you might have heard is that whenever you spray a bottle of perfume in a room, these molecules disperse so quickly in the room that the smell basically spreads around. This is why this is so. This is because of the this is because of the molecules being spread around the area that is greater. So whenever there is a greater surface area, there is a greater rate of the diffusion also. Let's talk about the temperature. There are two temperatures majorly whenever there is a high temperature and whenever there is a low temperature. We are going to talk about the higher and then the lower. Whenever there is a high temperature somewhere, the molecules basically gain the energy, and due to this energy, they start moving. Whenever they start moving vigorously, they tend to diffuse more quickly. Whenever the temperature is high, they diffuse more quickly. But whenever the temperature is low, the molecule does not gain energy, does not gain the kinetic energy to basically spread or to basically move apart. That's why, because of no movement, the diffusion rate is low whenever the temperature is low. Now let's talk about the concentration gradient. Whenever there is a greater concentration, the rate of diffusion would be lower. The steeper the gradient, the lesser would be the rate of the diffusion. This is all you need to learn about the concentration gradients relation with the diffusion. Number four is the distance. Now, when, for example, let's say this is a pipe of this area, and then we have a pipe that has a smaller region area. So, how would the diffuse? We need to learn that how would be diffusion taking place from a cylinder that is longer and the cylinder that is smaller. Obviously, the diffusion shall be stronger and also faster in an area which is smaller than rather than the area which is longer. It will take more time to diffuse. The molecules shall take more time in regard to the one which has a lesser area. And these are the four relations that you need to learn. Number one is the surface area, then we have temperature, then we have concentration gradient, and then we have the distance. The next topic for the diffusion and the osmosis is how the cell basically react when they are placed in a different kind of a solution, when they are placed in an isotonic solution, hypertonic solution, or hypotonic solution. Okay, when the cell becomes turgid, the term turgid or the term turgidity means when it becomes rigid. When the cell becomes rigid and exerts pressure on the outer membrane, where they are said the cell is said to be turgid. For example, when this is a cell that consists of 2% solution inside and 1% solution outside. So the water shall move. How would be the moving? The water shall move from the inside to the outside as the water moves from higher concentration to the lower concentration. So it will be moving from inside of the water to the outside of the water in such a manner that the vacuole or the inner membrane shall exert pressure on the cell wall, due to which it becomes turgid, and the rigid structure of the cell is said to be its turgidity. And this is how a cell behaves and becomes turgid. Now let's talk about when it is placed in an isotonic solution. Isotonic solution means when there is a no change of concentration. Let's say, for example, if there is a 1% solution outside, there is a 1% solution inside. If there is a 2% outside, then there is a 2% inside. The same concentration is basically outside and inside, and there is a no concentration gradient. In such solution, the no change takes place. Instead, the solution and the vacuole as well as the cell content remains in equilibrium condition. Alright. The third condition says when the cell becomes flaccid. And when does it occur? It occurs when the solution outside is in a higher concentration and the one inside is in a lower concentration. In such condition, the water moves from inside to outside and the cell becomes flaccid. By the term flaccid, it means that it becomes very D-shaped and it is not very rigid in structure. Now, let's talk about the fourth condition, which is the plasmolysis. Plasmolysis is a condition in which the cell membrane basically gets apart or pulls apart from the cell wall. In such condition, due to the process of the osmosis, as the water molecules moves in and out of the cell becomes plasmolysed, and the cytoplasm, which consists the cell contents, is pulled away from the cell wall. In such condition, the cell is said to be plasmolysed. The other term that you learn along with the plasmolysis is the deplasmolysis. Deplasmolysis is a condition when the plasmolysis is a condition when the plasmolysis becomes reversed and it comes back to its original position. Then we say that the cell is deplasmolized. These are all the conditions that need to learn when a cell is placed in a solution where it becomes turgid, and the one where it becomes plasmolized, where it becomes flaccid, and where there is a no change. That term is sweet isotonic solution. Next, now let's talk about when a cell is placed in a hypertonic solution, what happens when it is placed in an isotonic solution, what changes occurs, and when it is placed in a hypertonic solution. Hypertonic solution, as you can learn by the term which means hyper, which means more, and tonic means the solution. Iso means same, and the hypo means less. This is how you can learn about the hypertonic, and the isotonic. Let's say, for example, there's more amount of the concentration outside than the inside, and water move from inside to the outside. We say in such condition that the cell is placed in a hypertonic solution. That the water moves outside the cell. All right. In isotonic solutions, since the concentration is same, the equilibrium is established, thus there is no movement of molecule. If there is a movement of molecule, the equal movement of molecule is outside to the inside, which means that if there are two molecules moving outside the cell, then there will be two molecules that shall move inside the cell. All right. The third condition, we are going to talk about the hypotonic solution in which water will move inside the cell. In hypertonic, the water moves outside the cell. In hypotonic, the water moves inside the cell. Well, in this condition, the water moves inside the cell, where from the less concentration to the higher concentration, and the this condition is said to be hypotonic. Let's learn about the term turgidity. Turgidity means when a cell membrane is being pushed away against the cell wall and the cell become very rigid. This is what you mean by turgidity. How do plant cells maintain their rigidity? Turgidity and rigidity are very much linked together because they both are simultaneously working. And whenever there is a turgidity, it oftenly gives rigidity. And whenever there is rigidity, the cause to the rigidity is the turgidity. This is what you mean by turgidity and the rigidity. Now, let's come on to the third main topic for this chapter, which is the active transport. Active transport is not very similar to the diffusion and the osmosis because of some factors. Number one factor is that it moves against the concentration gradient. And the second factor is that it requires the energy. Against the concentration gradient means that it moves from the region of lower concentration to the region of higher concentration, and it requires energy. Now, how does this process makes the energy, and from where the energy active transport gets? This is what we are going to learn. All right. So, the definition of the active transport, the definition of the active transport is the movement of material through a membrane against the concentration gradient. That is the movement from the lower concentration to the movement of the high concentration. For the process of the active transport, we need a certain type of the protein, that is the carrier protein. These carrier proteins help us to transfer the molecules from one region to the another region. These are the carrier proteins that are mostly the lipoproteins, and they help us make up the ATP. They are embedded in the cell. This is the condition of a cell membrane. These are the intrinsic protein. These are the extrinsic protein. There we have the carrier protein. These carrier proteins help us to transfer the one molecule to the another molecule. And this is how these are basically the building sites of the ATP. These are the building sites of ATP. And how does they do so? They do so in such a manner whenever ATP, which stands for the adenosine triphosphate, is converted into ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, and release of the 1-phosphate group. Due to this release of the 1-phosphate group, the energy is released. So the carrier protein is responsible for the release of the energy as they are the building sites of the ATP. This helps us to convey the active transport process. Let's discuss about this equation that I've discussed earlier, how ATP gives us the energy. The energy phenomena is such so whenever ATP, one phosphate group of the ATP is released out, one phosphate is released, we say that the phosphate group is released in such a manner that the energy is given. This is the easiest process that you need to learn how the ATP is converted into ATP. With the release of one phosphate group, we get the energy to carry out the process, that is the active transport, with the help of the carrier protein. As we know that ATP is the energy currency of the cell. Energy currency of the cell. Any process that requires the energy, that energy is taken from the ATP, energy currency of the cell. This is all you need to learn about the basically participation of ATP for the process of active transport. Before we end the topic, let's discuss about the three vital pointers of the active transport. The active transport takes place against the concentration gradient. Due to this factor of against the concentration gradient, the active transport is differentiated from the process of the osmosis and the process of the diffusion. Next is that it requires a carrier protein, as the carrier proteins are mostly lipoprotein that are embedded in the structure, and they are responsible for the building of the ATP, since they are the building sites of the ATP. What does the carrier protein functions at? It functions at the building sites of ATP, where ATP is synthesized and release the energy that is used for the process of the active transport. It needs energy by the process of the respiration. So respiration takes place in the cells that gives off the energy. The respiration are of two types. It can either be aerobic or it can be anaerobic. Now, what is meant by the term aerobic and the anaerobic? Aerobic means which is in the presence of the oxygen, and the anaerobic means which is in the absence of the oxygen. However, the release of the energy or the amount of the energy that is released in the process of the aerobic and the process of the anaerobic may differentiate. The energy that is released in the aerobic is much more than the energy which is released in the anaerobic. So these are the three pointers that you need to learn about the active transport in order to learn the process in detail. This is all that you need to learn in this topic before you give your exam for the chapter movement into and out of the cell. And three main topics is the diffusion, osmosis, diffusion, osmosis, and the active transport. And we have discussed these three topics in detail. So for further videos like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the pulsating biology.